St. Joseph, Missouri, April 3rd, 1882, 9:43 a.m. Jesse James stood on a chair, back turned, straightening a picture on the wall. 8 feet behind him, Robert Ford raised a nickel-plated .44 revolver, Jesse's own gun, borrowed from his collection that morning. 6 months Ford had eaten at Jesse's table, slept under his roof, laughed at his jokes. 6 months building trust with America's most wanted outlaw. Now his hand was steady. No hesitation. No warning. Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden had promised $10,000 and a full pardon for Jesse's death. Ford's finger tightened on the trigger. Click. The hammer fell. The shot echoed through the small house. Jesse dropped instantly. His wife Z screamed from the kitchen. Children ran crying. The nickel-plated revolver smoked in Ford's hand, the gift that became a murder weapon. That gun would make Ford the most hated man in America. The dirtiest coward who ever lived. October 1881, 6 months earlier. Jesse James was recruiting for what he called one last big job, a train robbery that would set him up for retirement. Most of his original gang was dead or captured. The Pinkerton Detective Agency had spent 15 years hunting him, bombed his mother's house, killed his half-brother. Jesse was running out of people he could trust. He needed fresh blood. Robert Ford's older brother, Charlie, was already in the gang, a veteran who'd fought with Quantrill's raiders during the Civil War. Confederate loyalty meant something to Jesse. When Charlie vouched for his younger brother, Bob, Jesse made an unusual decision. He invited both Ford brothers to live with him at his safe house in St. Joseph, a small city in northwest Missouri where he'd been hiding under the name Thomas Howard. The house was modest, unremarkable, exactly what a man trying to disappear would choose. Jesse lived there with his wife Z and their 2 children, playing the role of ordinary family man. Bob Ford saw the invitation for what it was, an opportunity. Not for robbery, for something bigger. January 1882. Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden was tired of Jesse James. 15 years of robberies, murders, humiliation of law enforcement. The outlaw had become a folk hero to some, a Confederate martyr, a symbol of resistance against northern banks and railroads. Crittenden wanted him dead, and he didn't care about legal niceties. He launched a secret campaign, offering full pardons and the $10,000 reward to anyone who could deliver Jesse, preferably dead, no trial required. The offer reached Charlie Ford through a Kansas City police contact who knew the Fords were close to Jesse. Charlie told his younger brother. Bob Ford did the math. He was 20 years old, already wanted for minor crimes, facing a rope if caught. Option 1. Continue as a small-time outlaw in Jesse's shadow, probably die in a shootout or hang. Option 2. Kill Jesse, collect $10,000, get a pardon, walk free, become famous. The choice seemed obvious. Jesse James had robbed banks for 15 years, killed at least 8 men, evaded every trap. He was a legend. But legends die when someone inside the circle decides survival matters more than loyalty. February through March 1882, Bob Ford lived inside Jesse's world, studying him like a hunter studies prey. Every morning started the same way. Breakfast at the kitchen table with Jesse, Z, the children, and Charlie. Jesse had a specific routine. He'd wake up armed, always. But during breakfast, he'd remove his gun belt, hang it on a chair 8 feet from the table. For those 30 minutes, he was vulnerable. Ford watched, memorized, calculated angles and distances. Jesse was planning an April bank robbery in Platte City. Ford was included in the crew, a sign of trust that would have meant everything if Ford hadn't already decided to betray him. Then something unexpected happened. Jesse gave Ford a gift, a nickel-plated Smith & Wesson .44 caliber revolver, beautiful and deadly. "You're one of us now," Jesse said. "A man needs a good weapon." Ford took the gun, felt its weight, understood the symbolism. Jesse trusted him completely. The irony would become legendary. The gun given as a token of trust would be the same gun that killed its giver. Ford kept the revolver close, cleaned it daily, and waited for the perfect moment. Late March 1882, the window started closing. Jesse announced the gang would leave St. Joseph immediately after the April robbery. The Pinkertons were getting too close. Informants were talking, and staying in one place too long invited disaster. After the job, everyone would scatter permanently. Different cities, different lives. Ford's timeline compressed. Act now or lose the chance forever. He'd been receiving pressure from the governor's office through intermediaries. Where was Jesse? When would Ford deliver? The deal could be rescinded if Ford delayed too long. Meanwhile, Jesse's trust had reached its peak. "You boys are family now," he told the Fords one evening over whiskey. "Family doesn't betray family." Ford nodded, smiled, agreed. Inside, he'd already made his choice. He picked April 3rd as the day. Jesse had mentioned wanting to clean the house, hang some new pictures Z had bought. That meant he'd be unarmed, distracted, vulnerable. Ford didn't tell Charlie the exact moment. Some decisions you make alone. Some betrayals can't be shared, even with your brother. The nickel-plated .44 waited on Ford's bedside table, loaded, ready. April 3rd, 1882, started like every other morning in the James household. Jesse woke up, checked his weapons, a habit from 15 years on the run, and came downstairs for breakfast. Z cooked eggs and biscuits. The children played in the front room. Charlie Ford sat at the table, nervous, avoiding eye contact. Bob Ford was calm, focused, running through the plan one more time in his mind. Jesse mentioned the weather. Warm for April, good day to clean house. He removed his gun belt, hung it on the chair, exactly as he'd done 100 times before. 8 feet away, too far to reach in an emergency. Ford's internal countdown had started. After breakfast, Jesse announced he wanted to hang a new picture in the living room, a photograph of a racehorse he'd won money on years ago. He grabbed a chair, dragged it to the wall, stepped up. His back was completely exposed. Guns on a chair across the room. Wife in the kitchen. Children outside playing. Ford positioned himself behind Jesse, hand moving slowly to the nickel-plated .44 tucked in his waistband. Charlie pretended to read a newspaper, couldn't bring himself to watch what was about to happen. The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock and distant children's laughter. Jesse adjusted the picture frame, oblivious. Then he said something that almost stopped Ford cold. "Bob, you're quiet this morning. Something wrong?" Ford's hand froze for half a second. "Nothing, Jesse. Just tired." Jesse turned back to the picture. "Well, wake up. We got work to do." That was the last thing Jesse James ever said to Robert Ford. Ford drew the nickel-plated revolver, raised it, aimed at the back of Jesse's head. No more hesitation. Just mathematics. $10,000. Freedom. Survival. What Ford didn't know. 3 blocks away, Pinkerton detectives watched the house through field glasses from a second-floor window they'd rented under false names. They'd been tracking Jesse for months. Knew about the Ford brothers. Knew about Governor Crittenden's secret deal. The Pinkertons had their own orders. If Ford failed or lost his nerve, they'd raid the house on April 5th. 3 heavily armed agents with shotguns and a warrant signed by a federal judge. The operation was planned down to the minute. Meanwhile, back in Jefferson City, Governor Crittenden sat in his office, waiting for a telegram. He'd bet his political career on this gambit, offering pardons to criminals to kill criminals. If it worked, he'd be a hero. If it failed, he'd be a disgrace. 3 forces converging on one moment: Ford's betrayal, Jesse's vulnerability, the Pinkerton backup plan. None of them knew about the other's exact timing. The Pinkertons assumed Ford would try during the planned bank robbery, not in Jesse's home. Crittenden thought it might take weeks. Ford had 60 seconds before Jesse turned around and saw the gun. In that 60 seconds, American outlaw history would change forever. The nickel-plated .44 that Jesse had given Ford as a symbol of trust and family was about to become the most infamous murder weapon in the frontier West. Every decision Ford had made for 6 months, every smile, every shared meal, every moment of fake loyalty, led to this single point in time. 9:43 a.m., April 3rd, 1882. St. Joseph, Missouri. A small house on a quiet street, and a man standing on a chair, completely unaware that his life had exactly 3 seconds left. Jesse James had survived 15 years through paranoia and pattern breaking. He never slept in the same place twice for long. He trusted almost no one completely. He kept weapons within reach always, except for those 30 minutes at breakfast and the occasional moments when domestic life required normalcy. The Pinkertons had tried everything: infiltration, informants, ambushes, raids. In 1875, they'd thrown an incendiary device into what they thought was Jesse's hideout. It killed his half-brother and blew off his mother's arm. Jesse became even more careful, even more ruthless. By 1881, most of the original James Younger gang was dead or imprisoned. The younger brothers, Cole, Jim, and Bob, were serving life sentences in Minnesota. Jesse's brother Frank had gone into hiding separately. Jesse was down to a handful of men he could trust, and he needed more for the jobs he had planned. That's why he'd taken a risk on the Ford brothers. Charlie had Confederate credentials. He'd ridden with Quantrill's raiders, fought Union soldiers during Bleeding Kansas. That history mattered to Jesse, who saw himself as a Confederate guerrilla continuing the war by other means. Bob Ford was Charlie's brother, young, eager, useful. What Jesse missed, his one fatal blind spot, was that new generation of outlaws didn't care about Confederate loyalty or old grudges. They cared about survival. Jesse's pistol collection lined a shelf in his bedroom. Colt .45s, Smith & Wesson revolvers, Derringers, all kept loaded, all maintained obsessively. That morning, April 3rd, all of them were upstairs or across the room. The only gun within reach was the nickel-plated .44 in Bob Ford's hand. Did Jesse sense danger that morning? Some claimed later he'd seemed distracted, nervous. Others said he was relaxed, happy, planning his next robbery. The truth died with him. Z. James stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, unaware of what was happening 15 feet away in her living room. The children, Jesse Jr. and Mary, were outside playing in the yard, voices carrying through open windows. Morning sunlight streamed through lace curtains. The house smelled like breakfast: bacon grease, coffee, wood smoke from the stove. Ordinary domestic life for a family that was anything but ordinary. In the living room, Jesse stood on a chair, both hands on the picture frame, adjusting it so it hung straight. His back was completely exposed, muscles relaxed under his white shirt. The gun belt on the chair across the room might as well have been a mile away. Bob Ford stood 8 feet behind him, nickel-plated .44 in hand, arm extended, sight picture perfect. Charlie Ford sat at the table, newspaper trembling in his hands, unable to watch his brother commit murder, but unable to stop it either. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Children laughed outside. Dishes clattered in the kitchen. Then Jesse spoke, adjusting the frame one more time. "Bob, hand me that small hammer on the table, would you?" Ford didn't respond. His finger tightened on the trigger. The moment stretched impossibly long, seconds that felt like hours. Jesse started to turn, sensing something wrong in the silence. "Bob!" Ford fired. The explosion in the small room was deafening. The bullet struck Jesse in the back of the head, just below the skull, angled slightly upward. He dropped instantly, falling from the chair, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The picture frame fell with him, glass shattering. Z screamed. Charlie dropped the newspaper. Bob Ford stood frozen, nickel-plated revolver smoking in his hand. The weight of what he'd just done settling over him like a shroud. The immediate aftermath was chaos and cold precision. Jesse James lay on the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Blood pooled under his head, soaking into the rug Z had bought at a church sale. She ran into the room, saw her husband, saw Bob Ford holding the gun, understood instantly what had happened. The children burst through the door, saw their father's body, started screaming. Ford and Charlie didn't hesitate. They ran, straight out the front door, down the street, directly to the St. Joseph police station 6 blocks away. They surrendered immediately, announced they'd just killed Jesse James, demanded protection and telegraph access. The police initially didn't believe them. Jesse James killed in his own home by his own gang members seemed too incredible. But Ford was insistent. "Send a telegram to Governor Crittenden. Tell him Jesse James is dead. Tell him the Ford brothers did it." The telegram went out within 20 minutes. "Jesse James killed this morning in St. Joseph. Ford brothers in custody. Await instructions." The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, telegraphs reached every major newspaper in America. "Jesse James murdered. Outlaw legend shot by gang member. Ford brothers claim reward." Public reaction was immediate and vicious. Jesse, whatever his crimes, had been shot in the back of the head, in his own home, by someone he trusted. Ford expected to be treated as a hero, the man who ended a 15-year reign of terror. Instead, newspapers called him a coward, a traitor, the lowest form of human being. "The dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard," a phrase from a ballad that emerged within days, became Ford's permanent epithet. He'd killed a legend. America would never forgive him. April 1882. The Ford brothers stood trial for murder in Buchanan County, Missouri. The proceeding was a formality, and everyone knew it. The evidence was overwhelming. Ford confessed immediately. The gun was recovered. Witnesses confirmed everything. The jury deliberated less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced both brothers to hang. Then Governor Crittenden stepped in, as promised. Full pardons for both men, issued the same day as sentencing. The $10,000 reward was paid in cash, delivered in a leather satchel to Ford's attorney. The money was real. The freedom was real. Everything else was a nightmare. Jesse's funeral in Kearney, Missouri drew thousands of mourners. Confederate veterans, farmers, outlaws, ordinary people who'd seen Jesse as a folk hero standing against Northern oppression. They filed past his coffin, mourning not just a man, but a symbol. Meanwhile, Bob Ford became the most hated man in Missouri. Death threats arrived daily. Vigilantes tried to storm the jail before the pardon was issued. When Ford walked free carrying $10,000 in a satchel, he had money but nowhere to spend it. No town would have him. No business would serve him. The nickel-plated .44 was seized as evidence, displayed in the sheriff's office like a museum piece. Ford's calculation had been simple. Betray Jesse, get rich, go free. What he hadn't calculated was the cost of a reputation destroyed forever. The math worked perfectly on paper. $10,000. Full pardon. Freedom from prosecution. Bob Ford had everything he'd wanted. Everything except a life worth living. By May 1882, Ford realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake in judgment. Yes, he had money. Yes, he was free. But he was also marked for death by every Confederate sympathizer, every Jesse James admirer, every person who valued loyalty over survival. He couldn't go home, couldn't use his real name in most places, couldn't walk into a saloon without someone recognizing him and reaching for a gun. The legend of Jesse James grew larger in death than it ever was in life. Songs were written portraying Jesse as a martyr, Ford as Judas. Jesse James was a lad who killed many a man. He robbed the Glendale train. But that dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard has laid poor Jesse in his grave. The ballad spread across America, sung in saloons and churches, cementing Ford's role as history's villain. He'd expected gratitude. He'd expected to be seen as the man who ended an outlaw's reign of terror. Instead, he became synonymous with betrayal. The nickel-plated .44, the gun Jesse had given him as a gift, sat in a sheriff's office, transforming from a weapon into a symbol. The gun that friendship gave. The gun that betrayal fired. The next 10 years were a slow-motion disaster for Robert Ford. He tried everything to escape his reputation, changed his name, moved to different states, attempted to start legitimate businesses. Nothing worked. Eventually, he embraced the only currency he had left, infamy. He organized a traveling theatrical show, The Man Who Killed Jesse James. For admission fees, people could watch Ford reenact the murder, hear his version of events, ask questions. The shows were grotesque spectacles. Ford would stand on a stage, describe the betrayal in detail, point a prop gun at a dummy representing Jesse, pull the trigger while the crowd jeered. Some audiences threw bottles, others just stared in disgusted fascination. The money was good, but the cost was spiritual destruction. Every performance was a reminder that his defining achievement was shooting an unarmed man in the back of the head. Death threats continued. Vigilantes attempted ambushes. Ford moved constantly, drinking heavily, descending into paranoia that rivaled Jesse's own. By 1892, he'd ended up in Creede, Colorado, running a saloon and gambling hall. The nickel-plated .44 had become a touring artifact by then, displayed in Wild West shows and museums, always labeled, "The gun that killed Jesse James." Ford couldn't escape it. The weapon, the betrayal, the legend, they followed him everywhere. 10 years of running from a decision that took 3 seconds to execute. June 8, 1892, Creede, Colorado. Bob Ford stood behind the bar of his saloon, serving drinks to miners and gamblers, trying to blend into frontier anonymity. A man named Ed O'Kelly walked in with a shotgun. No warning, no negotiation. O'Kelly had heard the stories, knew Ford's history, decided to become famous by killing the man who killed Jesse James. One shot to the chest. Ford died instantly, falling behind his own bar. His last words, according to witnesses, "I expected gratitude, got nothing but hate. The nickel-plated .44 that killed Jesse James outlived both men. It was seized, toured, displayed, becoming one of the most famous weapons in American history. Museums fought over it. Collectors offered fortunes. The gun itself, metal and mechanics, carried the weight of legend, betrayal, and the price of choosing survival over loyalty.